Welcome to our weekly program. We call it Moral Side of the News. We're glad you're alongside. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children. With me, as always, our distinguished panel, Rabbi Gaylia Rooks, the Temple, Reverend Harriett Akins-Banman, Centenary United Methodist Church in New Albany, and Father Tony Smith, Archdiocese of Louisville. It's our first Moral Side of the News with the Biden-Harris team in place in Washington. It was far from traditional this Inauguration Day in the wake of the siege on the Capitol and the ongoing pandemic, but a peaceful transfer of power did take place this week. So, panel, I want to ask you your reaction to what you heard and saw. Harriet, why don't you start?
I was so moved by President Biden's tapestry of words that wove together this message of unity, democracy, and hope. What most moved me was toward the end of his speech, he said, as my first act as president, we will do this. And we took that moment to silently pray or speak to the Creator in whatever way we chose to remember all of those who have died from the coronavirus and the suffering that has gone on in our nation. And I was very moved that was his spoken first act in which we were invited to participate. And I thought that set the tone for his movement with all of us forward. We will do this work together.
It was beautiful. It was so touching. I had commented months and months ago to my husband that it reminded me of the decision during the Vietnam War. Oh, maybe it wasn't Vietnam. No, it wasn't. It was in the Middle East, in Iraq, or that they didn't show fallen soldiers coming back. In the Vietnam War, we always saw the planes with the coffins draped with the American flag, and how I felt like a lot of the news was ignoring the fact that, 400,000 Americans, just Americans, have died from COVID. And so the fact that he, not only did he take that was his first action, and Harriet, I think you're right, it was beautiful, but that he, the night before, the eve of the inauguration, when he had that memorial at, so classy, so touching and moving, and the empathy and compassion, it was just, it really, I thought that was beautiful.
Struck me too, when I agree with you, that call to prayer, as it were, struck me because it reminded me of when Pope Francis was elected. I don't know if you saw, when he comes out and is introduced to people, a lot of times they use those for his first comment to the people that he would be the Pope for is, let's spend a moment in prayer for me and for the world. Nice. He called to prayer as well. Something very similar, I saw that, but I was taken as well. I'm not a Democrat, but I was taken by his comments, and like I say, his speechwriters, I think, are very good because he's been in the business for about 50 years or so. But the poetry and almost of the poetry of the language was there, and he got the message across. The one that popped at me. There's a number of them. We could talk about a lot of his things, but I think the one that really got my attention, and I think it was throughout the whole of his talk and so far, and really of his years in service to the American people as well, is when he said the whole thing, we have an option as an American country to give an example of our power, or better, the power of our example.
Oh, I wrote that down. America lead by
very good
example of the nation's power.
Yes, right.
But by the power of the nation's example.
Bingo. And that, not just for our nation, but for the whole world. And the call that he had in the same sense of that spirituality, if you want to use that terminology, when he called us to be spiritual people, to turn ourselves away from fear, open our hearts for the other. My understanding of the Judeo-Christian scriptures, both testaments use that terminology. It's always kind of other-oriented, God, the great other, the supreme other, and the other of one another. We do best we can to make life available for others as well. So, that's my first comment. I agree with you, but I found that prayer concept, and of course, he's a trained Catholic boy, as we say, but he's constantly calling upon the tradition that he has been taught to go to prayer and use prayer. What did he do the morning of the inauguration? He went to church service, just to say, okay, I want to be in good graces as best I can with my maker so that I can be a better servant for my country.
Well, I wanted to touch on that too. The religious tones in his speech, in his comments, and also the going to mass that morning, inviting people from both sides of the aisle. That said a lot, didn't it? Or made a statement.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. It
set a tone for humility about who he is going into the highest office in our land. It said to me, I am not above. My position is, but I will be with you in worship, and that's where we will begin our work together. It's a huge statement in that action.
I mean, he has lived a life of faith, openly, honestly, but without pushing his faith on others, without defining how any given person should believe. A quote that I particularly liked that I wrote down from his inauguration speech, which I thought was almost like a sermon. I mean, I wish I could give sermons that were that inspiring and that meaningful. He said, "History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect." And I love that. And Tony, I think you were alluding to that about the other and the neighbor, and how in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, it says, love thy neighbor as thyself. And if we live in such a global, the Jews call it a global shtetl, a global village. Right. We're all neighbors, and we know, like, his commitment to the environment. What destroys one environment impacts all of us. And when we don't treat the other as a child of God, as another living soul that is worthy of not just dignity and respect, but food and shelter and peace and safety, and just, I think that, a lot of people said, oh, I'm not excited about Biden. I'm not excited. I've had enough excitement. I think 2 weeks ago, we had the cap off on all the excitement this nation needs for a long, long while. And I just appreciate his humility, the fact that he did go to church, to pray to be the very best president he could be, not for himself, not even for his legacy. He doesn't do it for the power and the glory and the money and the political, he does it because he really does see that as part of his calling to help, not only for him to be the best person he can be, for America to be the best nation that we can be, every individual, and to help all the countries of the world see this vision of justice and righteousness.
I was going to say the Christian scriptures also, obviously we spring forth from the older scriptures, but we say too, that we love our neighbor, etc. And Jesus in one of the parables was asked, who is my neighbor? And the input of that parable was, everyone is your neighbor, as you were saying, Gaylia. To me, it speaks, and it also gets kind of towards the darker side that he addressed, in the sense of, you mentioned that he's a good example, good Christian fellow, good Catholic boy and all that. But there are members in our tradition, our Roman Catholic tradition is just as divided as the nation is in regards to politics and things of this nature. And there are a number of people out there, both cleric and non-cleric, who would not see him as a good, quote, Catholic. I see him as a very good Catholic. But it also brings up to, and maybe I don't know if we want to talk about this a little bit, but the whole thing of the disunity that is there, that is prevalent at the present time. And I was impressed with his, when he addressed fear, do not be afraid, don't turn inward, open your souls and hearts to others. He said, this is what leads to democracy and unity. For both sides of the aisle now politically, there's a call for unity, and it kind of strikes me that those who in previous time strove for disunity are now calling for unity. And that's a political, okay, is as it is. My prayer to God is that he does indeed bring about a unity, because he's been on both sides. It says he has been there, 50 years. He knows the Congress, and hopefully I pray to God that he will be able to bring a unity to this nation, to defeat the fear. The fear is what brings about all of the difficulties we have at the present time. That's my perspective. So
I don't think that they mean unity. I think that there's a vocabulary difference here. I'm afraid that those on the far right see, oh, I thought he was going to work for unity means that there's no punishment for crimes, and I mean real crimes that have been done. And I'm worried that people are going to say, oh, he said he wanted unity, then why is he, pursuing why can't he just let it go? Well, I don't think you can let it go. He may not be what some people call a good Catholic, far be it from me to determine what makes a good Catholic. But I think he's a good person. I think that he is a person of very high moral fiber, very high character. I think that he is a person, again, whether by the definition of Catholicism or various branches of Protestantism or Islam or Judaism or Baha'i, or whatever it is, I think that he has respect for all people, and God willing will be respected by all people.
He was very holistic in his approach in his speech to remind us of being all people. And another piece within the speech that reminded me of that is he not only defined who he would be for us as our elected leader, he bookends his, I almost said sermon, he bookends his speech with the oath that he has taken. And he comes back to that at the end saying, this is my oath to you. I really will do these things. But in the midst of that, he gives to us our job description, that it is time for us to be neighbor to one another again, because we know what that means. And it's time for us to work together again, to walk away from fear. And he reminds us of all the things that we have in common. In what he said, what are the common objects that we love that define us as Americans? And he says, I think I know those things: opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and truth. I'm thinking, wow, you're reminding us who we are, not only as believers, but who we are at the core of being a person with moral fiber.
I find that he's in an unenvious position. It's almost a no-win situation. There will be individuals who take umbrage at whatever he says or does, etc. I hope he is successful in what and God willing, he will be. But I'm just drawing for an example of even our own tradition. For instance, if you have a faith community that's having difficulty, especially with the leadership or whatever, quite often, and some bishops will do this, they will pull that pastor and, it's going to sound terrible, send in a sacrificial lamb, in the sense that the one who goes in then is set inside there to make peace, as it were, knowing that it's almost a no-win situation. And then it's ready then for another pastor to come in and take the reins and lead them forward. So I hope President Biden is not just the sacrificial lamb that we've thrown out there to be the slings and arrows of misfortune, whatever, coming his way, but he should be, hopefully he will be able not only to point us in the direction we should go, but he should be able, hopefully, to lead us in that direction. And again, with all the experience this man has, I know if you've seen some of the programs they've had on PBS, whatever, where they followed his career, whatever, he's had the ups and he's had the downs. But what impresses me about him is when he goes down, he admits it and goes back up, builds it back up, And that to me is a sign of a good leader, that you're able to say, listen, I messed up.
Right.
But let's not mess up in the future. Let's together work forward. And that's what I hope the president he becomes or is and shows forth to the country, not just someone who goes in and does make peace so that another younger person can come in. Sometimes, if I may just one more second, in our tradition, when the Pope dies or so, sometimes they will elect what they call a caretaker Pope. Someone who, as we say in the jargon, keeps the seat warm until the new guy comes on. But if you look at the history of our tradition, every time there has been a caretaker Pope elected, major changes in the church take place. I'm thinking of John 23rd, but John 23rd. He was just supposed to keep the seat warm until somebody came by who was more charismatic. Vatican Council II occurs under his watch. Everything changes. So hopefully this would be not so much a caretaker president, but someone who can actually, and I don't say just point the direction, but take part in leading us in that direction as well.
And I don't want to go too far into our program without mentioning the significance of Kamala Harris as our vice president. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Significant in our history. We've never seen this before.
I talk to the ladies.
How sexist of you, Tony. Go ahead. You go first, Tony.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I'm a huge Kamala fan, not because she's married to a Jewish man, although I do love that her children call her Mamala, which I think is great. But she is remarkable. She's all that and more. And I think that she will bring a new understanding of the entire concept of what a vice president not only is, but can be. I think she will elevate that position to bring about great good. And she's another person who's just so full of love and care. She has a great sense of humor. She's compassionate and caring and very focused on her commitments to make things better, that the way things are is not good enough. And we are not going to just stand by and hope and pray that they get better. We're going to, get down into it and roll up our sleeves and make things better.
I appreciate her intelligence and her sassiness, because she'll do the pushback in an appropriate way. And I really like that about her character. And I like it that she and Biden seem to have a good working relationship already. It is very endearing to see how they respond to one another. Mm-hmm. So I really like it that I wept when she was taking her oath.
I take her as an example of the whole cabinet, whatever. Her background, her genetic structure. I mean, it's a combination of a number of issues and whatever number of identities. As we see his cabinet that he's basically set up to, as he says, it's going to be the most diverse in the country. And already there's pushback on that. Well, there are more people out there who could do a better job. I don't know. Maybe there is. Who knows? But I see her, Kamala, as the kind of the example of the whole cabinet type thing that, he doesn't get someone who's the old white guy favorite type thing that he himself was categorized as he was, but someone who's young, vivacious, you say, who's extremely talented and is coming to this office from a multitude of different formational aspects. In the same way with the cabinet, that I'm kind of excited about that, to see how this is going to go through, and not just with herself as being a vice president, perhaps down the road a president, but also see how this multifaceted cabinet that he is trying to get pushed through Congress right now, how that's going to do it. I have great hope to see that great success. So.
It's very exciting. It's I wanted to find a way to work this in anyway, because Amanda Gorman,
that was my next question, but go ahead. Yes, take it away.
I
stole the show.
I watched what she said 3 times over. I mean, her poetry, was it a poem or was it a speech or was it a charge, a call to action? But she said, Tony, what you were saying, how the cabinet reflects all of America. She said people of all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions. And that's what America is made up of. People of all cultures and colors and characters and conditions. And my only concern, my only caveat to that would be to uplift the conditions of those who are not, I feel like, and not just in the past 4 years, but especially in the past 4 years, the rich have gotten richer, the poor have gotten poorer, and there's the middle class, which I always believe is one of the things that made America great. I mean, there's so little middle class now. And I think that that's part of why we're so polarized. And certainly in the last few years, the rich got obscenely richer and the poor got obscenely poorer. And how we, as, I don't know if we're the wealthiest nation in the world, but certainly one of the wealthiest nations in the world, how can we have people sleeping under bridges and outdoors and more people losing their homes? And, the pandemic is something that has, even with the vaccines, that's another thing we should talk about. President Biden wants 100 million vaccines in his first 100 days.
That's right.
And how many vaccines have there even been since they started rolling out, like 17 million or something? I mean, he wants more every single day, and he wants to, did he sign an executive order to put the war powers that they were required to turn? I mean, why that wasn't done even before the vaccine was, tested and official? That's what we need. The impact on our economy, though, obviously, for those of us who are more comfortable, it has not impacted us as badly. And for those who were really living hand to mouth because they, didn't really have a fair opportunity to live the dream that America has in the past offered, those living on the fringes, man, they just have been so badly hurt. And everybody's saying, oh, I hope he doesn't raise taxes. I hope he doesn't raise taxes. Well, I hope he does, especially on the rich, because that's where the money's going to come from to help make our country a better country and to take care of all its citizens, all the people who live here.
I use the bottom line example for me. I use it when we talk about the makeup of our church, the makeup of our community. I use the old example of the Kentucky burgoo. You ever had burgoo? It's delicious, but you do not want to ask what's in it, type of thing.
That's why I haven't had it, because I think it has pork in it.
I think so. But still, it's. I think what we're seeing, the bottom line for me was the example of what Mr. Biden is putting together. I think is kind of a national burgoo, as it were. And, it is very tasty. I know if there's prohibitions and all that, but again, it's made up of a lot of different things. And I always tell people the best thing to do is not ask what's in it, but just to taste it, But that's the example I would use, that all the mixtures, everything comes together, all the different traditions, all the different philosophies, and we have one nation.
Just for 32 seconds, I want to bring up Lady Gaga. I thought she rocked the dress. I loved her. How many times have we heard the national anthem sung, right? But she sung it with the storyteller persona. And so we hear the story of the flag still being there after all of this disaster.
I know that brought tears to, when's the last
time? That was powerful.
National anthem?
And then for the dove with the olive leaf on her, the wampum big brooch or pie plate or whatever, that was awesome. So I appreciated that.
Yep. Tony, what you were describing, not to skip over what you said, Harriet, because it was spot on, but what you were describing about the Kentucky burgoo reminds me in my childhood how we used to talk about the melting pot, how America was the great melting pot. And that was seen as such a positive thing. We had Irish and Italian and, people from France and people from Africa and people from all over the world, England and everywhere. And I did once do, in my recipe for peace when I was asked to speak at that awards dinner, I talked about the melting pot. When you make that kind of a stew, sometimes the scum rises to the top and the good stuff gets stuck on the bottom. And so and I'm not a vegetarian, but I like to talk about how America is a tossed salad, where every individual ingredient maintains its own identity. You know, the carrot is crisp and the tomato is juicy and the lettuce and the, whatever you're putting in it, each one maintains its own identity. And because of that adds to the whole, because what would salad be with just lettuce? So I love that idea of, all the different parts coming together, and that our cabinet will reflect that.
But this is why I think Mr. President Biden says, we will provide the possibilities versus power, and we'll provide the hope versus fear, and the light versus darkness.
Right.
Again, I wish him Godspeed and best in anything that we can do as a nation of individuals. As past presidents have said, ask not what your country can do for you. This is the time now we put that into practice, really.
And I really feel like he calls on our better angels, and that has been missing for a long time.
So we have just a couple of minutes remaining. Go ahead, Harriet. Go ahead.
I appreciate his word about perseverance, and Miss Gorman included that in that beautiful poem, that it will take all of us to persevere, he said, through this dark winter, which means spring is coming. And a light of that spring is the cabinet he's gathering around us, or around himself, to help guide all of us. It's exciting.
And he knows from personal experience about the depths of winter and the coming of spring.
So in just a minute or so we have left, and if you think about that, the siege on the Capitol was just 2 weeks before that day. Do you think we've turned a new page, and are you optimistic about 2021?
Well, I'm always optimistic, so I'll say yes. And I think Obama tried to tell Trump that the biggest threat to America was national terrorism and white supremacy. And I think he was exactly right. And now, I can't believe it took that, but now that that has happened, hopefully no one will deny that, and we can address the issues and move forward.
I would say his comments addressed, as we say in our tradition, in a given faith community, usually have 20% are very active and 80% are just there. Hopefully, I think his call forward is addressed to the entire nation, not just that 20%, because we need the other 80% to help pull us back to where we can say we are truly a nation of God.
I am optimistic. The glass is always half full, so I think it's just upward and onward.
Fantastic. That will bring to a close our program, Moral Side of the News. Thank you to Gaylia Rooks, Reverend Harriett Akins-Banman, and Father Tony Smith. New this year panel, if you'd like to catch this program again, check out our Facebook page. Just go on Facebook and search for Moral Side of the News. We'll be back again next week with another edition of this program. Until then, be safe, stay well, and have a great week. Thank you, panel.